So I'm here with Steve Fan, who's standing for Association President. You've never had any involvement in the union, as far as I'm aware. Why are you standing?
There are a few reasons, and I start with them from the most important. The most important issue for me is housing, because as you might be aware, last Friday, there was a housing protest where students were really getting quite desperate about the housing situation in St. Andrews, where rents are high, yet you still couldn't find any form of housing.
But if you wanted to deal with that, if you cared about that, why weren't you accommodation officer? Why haven't you stood for that in the past?
Because it was always bad, and it was bad in a way that almost seemed like a sort of a fact of life in St. Andrews. But it's now bad in a way that's not just a state of nature. It's bad. It's something, it's worse now than it was before. And so why this rather than say accommodation officer? That's a very easy question to answer. Is because accommodation officer essentially deals with the existing constraints of the town. The town, given the constraint of HMO cap, given the constraint of what the university does with housing, what's the best way to help students navigate? That's essentially how the job traditionally has been translated into St. Andrews. But the role of the association president, that provides a bully pulpit that you can actually change the circumstances, hopefully change the circumstances, which really are seriously constraining the ability of students to find a place to live.
So it's kind of clear from your manifesto that you think the president has a lot of power. For example, you say that you want to remove the HMO cap, but you provide no method for doing this. Every president that I've ever known has campaigned against the HMO cap. Why do you think you'd be any more successful?
And that's a very good question, and it's not a very easy question to answer, but I start this way. I don't think the amount of direct executive power the president has in the association is as much as one could usually think. It's to the extent the president has power to affect things, to change things, it's because he has a legitimate role as representative of the...
But that's not removing the HMO cap.
Well, no, I get to that, because the HMO cap is a policy set by the 5 council as a part of local policy. Now, the people who are really seriously affected by the HMO cap are students, but the students have very little say in the going-ons of 5 council, because it's a 60-odd member council with a few members from St. Andrews. How do you change that situation? Traditionally, some friends of mine have said, you try to get councillors elected from St. Andrews who are pro-student housing. And I've always agreed with that position. I think that's a good step to take. But it's clear that the housing situation is now deteriorated to a point where even that action is not going to have a significant enough sort of consequence, a significant enough effect to really change things up. The only way I can see this changing is if the students make it absolutely crystal 100% clear to the university and to the town that their number one dominant issue is housing, and invest in their perhaps most important, but most visible, most well-known.
So you don't think that the presidents over the last 6 years that have not campaigned against the HMO cap, do you not think that the HMO cap is a massive problem for students?
I'll start with the current one. The current one wants to get more student housing as well. But I'm trying to recall the things I've actually read in the state that relate to the current association president. Then the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that he changed the regulations to allow for repeated terms, or argue for repeated terms. That's not the sort of thing that I think is the most important to me. It just has never come across to me as well to other students, that the absolutely dominant issue for him is housing, more than anything else, housing.
So you want to reduce hall fees using association resources. Does this mean money? Are you going to be paying hall fees using the Students' Association's money?
That particular point, what I said was I would try to get the university to reduce the rate at which hall fees are increasing with the resources of association for scrutiny and for advocacy. What it really meant is, traditionally, halls are meant to be a sort of So houses are an absolutely essential part of university accommodation, of accommodation in St. Andrews. But they've been getting more and more expensive.
But are you going to be using association money to pay?
I'm not advocating to use association money to directly pay house fees. That's not what I'm advocating.
So what does association resources mean in this case? Do you not think that the association resources already lobby to keep accommodation prices down?
I certainly think they do, but I think there is definitely room to do more, and perhaps in legal help, in advice and stuff like that. It does take real resources, money and material resources that the association could do more in a sense of a part of a general push for the association to do more on housing, rather than specifically just say reduce whatever.
So what do you think a reasonable price for the halls to be paying? For example, DRA, how much would you say the fees for that should be?
With DRA, I really wouldn't know, because in my first, I was staying in Jean Bernat, and at that point, if I recall correctly, I was paying something like 5,600, 5,800, 5,700 for a catered accommodation, a very nice catered accommodation. And from what I can tell, it actually has risen.
But what would it be under you? How much would you be paying under you?
Well, it's not something that would be entirely within my control, but ideally, would it be something that's risen in line with inflation rather than exceeding inflation, given what I've been paying at that point in time? I think people always consider house a little bit expensive, but there's a bearable sort of level of expensive, and now it's kind of slightly getting into the territory of excessive. And then, but I still don't think houses are the biggest complaint compared to the housing market overall, especially the private housing market overall in St. Andrews. But it is a significant part of the complaint as well.
Sticking on accommodation, you say that you want the university to build more accommodation. Now, this is already in the plans anyway.
Yeah.
But what are you proposing?
I'm proposing a variety of things. Essentially, the most realistic thing for a sabbatical officer to do in the construction front, in terms of getting more housing units into town, is A, try to get the university to build on a more accelerated schedule, and B,
to spend more money.
Spend more money.
Where's that money coming from? We know the university has had £2 million cut from its budget from the Scottish government. Where is the university going to get that money from?
Well, that's precisely the question.
Is that going to come out from well-being funds? Do you want people to suffer in that way? Is it student services that's going to get the money cut?
Well, I put it this way. And this is precisely the crux on which I'm focusing the question of housing, is I don't think at this present point in time, housing is as important an issue, a high enough a priority to the university as it is to the student body at large, and it should be for the university at large. And so you're saying, where's the money going to come from? Well, for me, the question is, why are we not putting housing first? And then looking
I'm not denying that.
I'm not saying you are. I'm just saying
it would be great to have lots more accommodation, but you need to pay for these things, and you haven't got anywhere in your manifesto how this is going to be paid for.
Well, also accommodation. If we're speaking specifically about constructing more university accommodation, that is not a cost item, because university accommodation is self-paying.
So accommodation doesn't have any initial outlay at all.
It does, but it's financed by debt, by university debt. And then it paid back by student accommodation fees. So there is actually no real genuine long-term fiscal impact on the university from building more accommodation. It's mostly a matter of political possibilities rather than sort of economics, and also the willingness of the university administration to take on that challenge and that responsibility.
Another point in your manifesto, or your 250 words, you don't actually have a manifesto, I noticed.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that you want to increase study spaces.
Yes.
Do you think that should go over and above the proposed library redevelopment?
I think so. My feelings and my ideas in study space are a little bit unorthodox, in the sense that I think it's absolutely imperative to have more study spaces within libraries. But
so you support the library redevelopment that's going to happen?
I do support it. I do support increasing library space. But more important for me, it seems that the more immediate solution is simply that there are lots of buildings around town, that university buildings, which are not being very heavily used, and which could easily be turned into a part-time study space at points in time when it's not being.
How many more spaces, though?
Well, I'll give you a very good example. Parliament Hall is rarely used.
But how many spaces?
Well, right now, how many spaces are in the library? 1,000 spaces, yeah?
Yeah.
So I think you could easily get 200, 300 more spaces
So
going.
that's exactly what the library redevelopment is proposing.
Well, that's over and above, because this isn't costing very much money. I mean, I'm just saying that the idea of increasing the study spaces additionally that I proposed, they don't cost a very great deal of money in relative terms.
The building doesn't cost money.
Well, the buildings are being maintained anyways. The buildings are there, the university are paying for them on a daily basis to maintain them.
Oh, so you mean you're going to make study spaces smaller?
No. I'll give you a very good example. English building. Absolutely fantastic, lovely building, but rarely used. And there are certain blocks of time when it could easily be turned into a study space on a regular basis. And that's not going to cost a great deal more money, but that will create additional spaces. Parliament Hall, same thing. There are lots of spaces which are not heavily used, and they could be more intensively used for study space and not have a very great effect, negative effect on other activities of the university.
So just in general, you end your 250 words saying that you proposed solid and sensible policies.
Yes.
But you don't even have a manifesto. Do you think that's really an appropriate thing to be? You're standing for association president and you don't even have a manifesto.
Well, I've tried to read political manifestos before, and I don't think relying too much on manifestos has done anyone ever very good. Because if you look at the history of electoral campaigns in this country, no manifesto could be said to be really worth.
But in terms of presidents, they do at least fulfill some of their promises. Your promises are removal of the HMO cap, building more halls, and reducing the fees. And you call these solid, sensible policies.
Well, I mean, those are the most important policies. And, like a manifesto is a wonderful thing, but...
And you think you can achieve those three things?
I do genuinely believe this. I'm not saying this to cameras. I do genuinely believe that if the university is forced to put its full resources, its full influence, its full prestige, its full role as a huge economic player in the 5 regions to use, to pressurize for the removal or at least the reduction of the effect of the HMO cap, there could be genuine change. Because right now you have flats in town that are going for, say, £1,000 for 2 people when there are 3 rooms. And they could be going for £1,200 for 3 people if they were actually able to rent it out for 3 people. Stuff like that is just absurd. But you don't propose any way. You say you're going to get rid of it, but you don't propose any way to get rid of it. You just say that you're going to lobby 5 council. That's what already happens. Well, you can lobby. That's what one way of lobbying is one way of putting it. But realistically, what really will likely move 5 council is universities, putting up all these economic development plans that's been mooting, and then in a way that really benefits 5, and saying, look, we're going to do all these things that are essential and beneficial to the local area as a big player in the local region, but we need movement on housing. Students need places to live. I have seen absolutely very little indication that university authorities are actually making student accommodation their #1 priorities in their engagement with local leaders. They're not doing that. If they were doing that, there would be more movement. The university is not an institution without power in the 5 regions. The notion that there could be no movement, that you could only lobby the council directly, that you could only sort of pray for a more sort of cooperative council and not use existing resources to do things more effectively, that I don't really agree with.
Well, Steve Than, it's been very enjoyable. Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you very much.